There are roughly 600 million domestic cats living in human homes right now. That makes them the most popular pet on Earth, found on every continent except Antarctica. They sleep on our beds, knock things off our tables, and stare at us as if they are judging every decision we have ever made. But when scientists finally decoded the domestic cat genome, what they found was unlike any other domesticated animal in history. The entire genetic difference between the purring tabby on your couch and a wild predator stalking rodents in the North African desert comes down to 13 genes across 5 tiny regions of DNA. And the story of how that happened, of how the cat became the world's most popular pet without humans ever really trying, just got rewritten. A 2025 study published in Science proved that almost everything we thought we knew about where domestic cats came from was wrong. Before we get to that bombshell, we need to go back to the beginning. And the beginning is not ancient Egypt. In 2004, a French archaeologist named Jean-Denis Vigne published a finding in Science that rewrote the timeline. At Chiluro-Cambos, a Neolithic village near Limassol in southern Cyprus, his team uncovered a human burial dating to 9,500 years ago. Less than 40 centimeters away, buried at the same depth in the same sediment, with its head facing the same direction, was a complete cat skeleton. The cat was about 8 months old. Its bones showed no signs of butchering. The human beside it was around 30, surrounded by rare offerings, including polished axes, flint tools, and a pit filled with 24 seashells. This was a wealthy burial by Neolithic standards. Cats are not native to Cyprus. Somebody loaded that animal onto a boat on the Mediterranean and brought it to the island deliberately. That single burial pushed back the earliest evidence of a human-cat relationship by over 4,000 years compared to the famous Egyptian depictions. Cats and people were already connected nearly 10,000 years ago, but connected is not the same as domesticated. And this is where things get strange. For decades, the accepted story went like this. Cats were domesticated in the Fertile Crescent roughly 10,000 years ago. Early farmers stored grain. Grain attracted mice. Mice attracted wildcats. Wildcats stuck around. Humans tolerated them. Over time, cats spread with agriculture into Europe and beyond. In 2017, Claudio Ottoni and Eva Maria Geigel published a landmark study in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution that seemed to confirm and expand this story. Their team extracted ancient DNA from 209 cat remains spanning 9,000 years across nearly 100 archaeological sites in Europe, North Africa, and Southwest Asia. They identified 2 separate waves of cat dispersal. The first came from the Near East during the Neolithic. The second came from Egypt during Classical Antiquity, when cats rode Phoenician and Roman ships across the Mediterranean as onboard pest controllers. It was a clean, satisfying narrative. In November 2025, it fell apart. Marco De Martino, working alongside Ottoni himself, published the largest ancient cat genome study ever conducted in science. Instead of relying on mitochondrial DNA alone, which only traces the maternal line, the team analyzed full nuclear genomes from 87 ancient and modern cats. The results were devastating for the old model. Every cat specimen from Europe and Turkey dating before the 3rd century BCE clustered genetically with European wildcats, not domestic cats. The supposed Neolithic domestic cats in Europe were actually just wild European cats that happened to live near human settlements. The earliest genetically confirmed domestic cat in Europe was a specimen from Sardinia, radiocarbon dated to the 2nd century AD. Domestic cats did not arrive in Europe with the first farmers 9,600 years ago. They came from North Africa, following Roman military and trade routes, only about 2,000 years ago. So, if cats arrived in Europe so recently, what actually changed in their DNA to make them domestic? The answer came from a female Abyssinian cat named Cinnamon. In 2014, Michael Montague at Washington University led the first high-quality sequencing of the complete domestic cat genome using Cinnamon as the reference. His team compared domestic cats from 6 breeds with European and African wildcats and found 281 genes showing signs of rapid change. Some were involved in digesting fat, an adaptation for an animal that eats nothing but meat. Others sharpened hearing and low-light vision, the 2 senses cats rely on most while hunting. But the real discovery was smaller than anyone expected. When the team looked for regions that specifically distinguished domestic cats from wild cats, they found 5 genomic regions containing just 13 genes. About half had known functions in the brain. 5 of those genes control the survival and migration of neural crest cells during embryonic development. The rest affect memory, fear conditioning, and stimulus-reward learning. That finding aligned perfectly with a hypothesis proposed by Wilkins, Wrangham, and Fitch in 2014, called the domestication syndrome. The idea is that the suite of traits shared by domesticated animals, including reduced fear, smaller faces, and sometimes floppy ears, can all be traced to mild changes in neural crest cell development during the embryonic stage. In dogs, cattle, and pigs, those changes are dramatic. In cats, they are almost invisible. No floppy ears, no shortened snout, no extreme body size variation. The entire behavioral gap between a wild predator and the animal sleeping on your lap traces back to a handful of tweaks in how the brain processes whether you are a threat or a source of food. And here is one of the wildest details in this whole story. The tabby coat pattern, the blotched or striped markings that most people picture when they think of a domestic cat, did not exist in the ancient world. Ottoni's 2017 study found that the recessive allele responsible for the blotched tabby pattern does not appear in the ancient DNA record until the medieval period. It first showed up in cats associated with the Ottoman Empire in Southwest Asia, and only became widespread in Europe and Africa by the 18th century. Think about what that means. Dogs have been selectively bred for thousands of years into hundreds of dramatically different shapes and sizes. Cattle, horses, sheep, and pigs were reshaped by millennia of deliberate human intervention. Cats lived alongside humans for roughly 9,000 years before a single person bothered to select one for how it looked. The 73 or more recognized cat breeds that exist today are almost entirely a product of the last 150 to 200 years of human choice. If this is changing what you thought you knew about cats, hit subscribe. I cover what DNA reveals about the strangest animals on Earth. And this story is about to take a turn nobody sees coming. In the 2000s, archaeologists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences found cat bones in farming settlements in Shanxi and Henan provinces dating to around 3,500 BC. Isotope analysis showed these cats were eating rodents that fed on grain, the exact same commensal relationship that produced domestic cats in the Near East. For a while, it looked like independent evidence of cat domestication in China. Then Jean-Denis Vigne, the same archaeologist who found the Cyprus burial, applied geometric morphometric analysis to 5 of those Chinese mandibles. Every single one belonged to the leopard cat Prionolurus bengalensis. It is a completely different species from the African wildcat that all modern domestic cats descend from. For over 3,500 years, leopard cats lived alongside Chinese farming communities, hunting their rodents, eating grain-fed mice, and in some cases being cared for by humans. One complete skeleton from Wuzhuang was deliberately buried, but leopard cats were never truly domesticated. True domestic cats only arrived in China around 730 CE, likely traveling the Silk Road during the Tang Dynasty. They appear to have entirely replaced the leopard cats in human settlements within a few centuries. China experienced 3,500 years of a parallel experiment that simply never worked. The genome did not just reveal how cats became tame. It revealed why they are such extraordinary hunters. Montague's 2014 comparison of cat, tiger, dog, cow, and human genomes found that genes for processing lipids evolved rapidly in the cat lineage. Cats are obligate carnivores, unable to produce certain nutrients found only in meat. Those fat metabolism genes protect cats from the artery-clogging effects of a diet that would devastate a human. The study also uncovered something unexpected about smell. Dogs expanded their general odorant receptor genes, making them scent-tracking specialists. Cats went the opposite direction, expanding their vomeronasal receptor system for detecting pheromones and chemical social signals while reducing their general odor detection. A cat sacrificed the ability to track prey by smell for the ability to read the chemical messages left by other cats. That makes perfect sense for a solitary ambush predator that needs to know who else has been in its territory, rather than chasing scent trails across open ground. Everything we have covered so far is a story about survival. Cats survived for millennia alongside humans while barely changing their DNA. But in Scotland, that same genetic closeness became a death sentence. In 2023, Joe Howard McComb of the University of Bristol published a study in Current Biology that reconstructed the genetic history of the Scottish wildcat using genome data from museum specimens dating back to 1906, archaeological samples as old as 8,000 years, and modern wild-living cats. The result was staggering. Domestic cats had been present in Britain for over 2,000 years. During almost all of that time, wildcats and domestic cats coexisted with nearly zero interbreeding. Then, starting around the mid-1950s, everything collapsed. By 1997, up to 74% of genetic markers in Scottish wildcats came from domestic cats. Today, not a single wild living or captive Scottish wildcat is free of domestic cat ancestry. The species is described as genomically extinct. What remains in the Scottish Highlands is a hybrid swarm, a confused mix of wild and domestic DNA. The team found that immune system genes from domestic cats were massively overrepresented in the hybrids. Their hypothesis is grim. Domestic cats brought diseases. Wildcats that inherited domestic immune genes survived the infections, but those genes came packaged with other domestic DNA through a process called linkage drag. Habitat loss had already pushed wildcats into shrinking highland pockets where they simply ran out of other wildcats to mate with. The Saving Wildcats project in the Cairngorms is now attempting to breed back toward wildcat genetics, but the original Scottish wildcat genome is gone forever. Every other major domestic animal was captured, penned, and bred by humans on purpose. Cattle were corralled, horses were broken, dogs were selected for traits over tens of thousands of years. Cats are the only exception. The process is called commensal domestication. Grain stores attracted mice. Mice attracted bolder wildcats. The wildcats that could tolerate human proximity gained access to more prey. The humans who tolerated wildcats had fewer rodent problems. Nobody captured anyone. Nobody built a pen. The relationship was mutual and entirely self-selecting. And the genetic evidence confirms it beautifully. The only genes that changed are the ones controlling fear, memory, and reward. Exactly the genes you would expect to shift if domestication was driven by cats choosing to approach humans, not by humans choosing cats. A 2022 study from the University of Missouri, analyzing over 1,000 random-bred cats, confirmed that all domestic cats trace back to a single domestication event in the Fertile Crescent, descending from one subspecies, the African wildcat, Felis libica libica. But even that story has a hole. A 2025 DiMartino study confirmed North Africa as the source for European domestic cats, but it could not pinpoint whether the epicenter was Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, or somewhere else entirely. The European Research Council-funded Felix project is now analyzing cat remains spanning 10,000 years from across the ancient world to find the answer. Meanwhile, the hybridization crisis threatening the Scottish wildcat is spreading. A 2023 consortium paper found that genetic swamping from domestic cats threatens European wildcat populations across the entire continent. 600 million domestic cats. Declining wildcat populations everywhere. The animal that changed almost nothing about itself to live beside us may be quietly erasing its wild ancestor just by existing nearby. The cat on your couch looks almost identical to the African wildcat hunting in the Saharan scrubland tonight. They are 13 genes apart, and the wild side of that equation is disappearing.